Today's topic for Access Lunchtime is queries. We're going to talk about Microsoft Access queries, how to do them, different types of queries, etc. So hopefully we can learn all about them, and if we have extra time at the end and you have specific questions, or even if you have specific questions about queries during the presentation, if you want to record those in the conversation, you are most welcome to, and we will try to address those either as we go or at the end of the presentation. My name is Maria Barnes. I'm the president of Barnes Business Solutions, which is a company that does custom software and specializes in databases, mostly Microsoft Access and SQL Server. I am also the chapter coordinator for the Access Lunchtime group. So hopefully you found this through the announcement that Lucy sent out. I didn't advertise widely this time, but I will advertise the recording, which hopefully we will have within a week. We're still working on getting the recording from last month's up. Our person who does that has been very busy lately. So if you are just joining us, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and mute the one person here. If you have questions, type in the conversation area, and hopefully that will allow you, if I don't know, the one person's only on phone, so hopefully I'll still be able to get information if they do want help with something. All right, so I have 3 pages showing up here, and I will reference them at different times during today's presentation. But these 3 topics are something that I wrote in the past, and so on my business website under how-to tips, you can find these 3 topics if you want to look at those in more detail after today's presentation. Here's the first one, which talks about Microsoft Access queries in general. The second one is mostly about different join types, and then the third one is about using OR in a where clause, which is not intuitively obvious if you haven't done it before. In general, today's topic here is going to be mainly for the Access beginner or medium level attendee, unless you have specific questions, about queries you've tried and what you've done in the past. If something hasn't worked, then today is also a great fit for you. So to make queries in Microsoft Access, the first thing you do is go to the Create tab. And I'm working in 2016 today, but this interface is pretty close to the same in 2007 and beyond. If you're working in something earlier than that, of course it's going to look a lot different, and honestly, you should probably upgrade. It's time. But the same functionality is there in the older versions. It's just that the interface looks different and is not a near as much of a it's not quite as user-friendly in the older versions. It's specifically once you're in the middle of creating a query. So for queries, under the Create tab, we have 2 of them here. And the Query Wizard is if you've been around using Microsoft Access for a long time, you will see that the Query Wizard is what used to happen pretty much all the time. I'm not going to go over the wizard in today's presentation, but basically it has the same functionality as you would get from design mode. It just steps you through the process a bit more. Also of note, in 2007 and later, I'm just going to hit query design without having anything selected here, but if you select a table or something first and you go to query design, it's automatically or more automatically listing or choosing that for you when you go in there. So the first thing to do when you get into design mode, and it opens it up by default in this view here, where you're going to have the tables showing on the top and then information on the bottom about your query, is to select the table that you want to query on. And you can query on tables, or you can query on queries, other queries. So if you already had a query, for example, and you wanted just some subset of that, either specific fields only or a where clause into that query, then you could use that. And you can see both of them on the both tab. So for example, excuse me, if you chose one of the tables like books, and you to add that table to your query design, you just hit the add button, and you can keep adding. You can add more tables to that, and then click add again, like select authors and click add again. When you're finished, you hit the close button or the X button. Either one works to close that pop-up window. There's other information available to you by default. The property sheet comes up when you're in design mode, and you can see that. You can close that. I honestly, other than for pass-through queries, don't use the property sheet very much for query design mode, and I find it easier just to turn that off or close that. Once you have a query started, you can use this design tab, and this section is much more user-friendly and does a lot more things than the older 2003 and older versions did. So there's different sections of this. The results section allows you to view this in different modes. The default is the design view, which again has the table up here and the fields that you've selected down there. Let me just, before I show you that, choose a couple fields. Let's say that we didn't want to show the book ID, but instead we wanted to show just the title. You could, and the published date, and you didn't want to see anything else. You could make a query to do that, and you can show the individual fields in a couple ways. One, you can double click on it and see how that moved it down here, or two, you can go to the next column and you can choose what it is you want to show, like that. So that's the basics of it. And you can show everything by double clicking or selecting on the star if you want to. And then the design allows you to switch. You can switch to a SQL view, which this is then the SQL context behind what you've done in design view. So here you've selected the book title and the published date from the books table. You can also go to datasheet view, which essentially shows you what's in the table, just those two fields. And I'm going to show you just a couple other ways. Once you're in the datasheet view, if you right-click on the header bar of the query, you can switch back to SQL or design view. You can do the same thing by running the query. That puts it, it's basically the same as putting it into a datasheet view. You can also, when you have it in design or SQL view, do the same thing, right click and switch from one view to the other. So that is the results section. I'm going to go through the query type a little bit later, but I'm just going to show you the query setup area here. To get the show table back, if you decided that you then wanted to hook in another table, like say you want to show the book title and the author, but all you have here is the author ID, you might hit show table on that, and go ahead and add the authors table, and it automatically tries to join for you. Here it's joining the author ID to the author ID in this table, and it did that for you because they're called the same thing, and so it's made the assumption, the educated guess, that that is the connection. If you don't want that connection, if it's the wrong connection, and you want to join on something else, you can click on that join and press the delete key, and then to connect like you want it to, you select the field from one table that you want connected to another, and you just hold that and drag it over to the fields you want to connect to, like that. You can also, on your connector bar, if you right click, you can use join properties, and that shows the table name on the left, the table name on the right, and the columns. So you could also change the columns that, maybe you can't change it right here. Sorry, apologize. But it shows you the two, likewise you can't change the left and right table name on there, but it shows you what you're connected on in case maybe this isn't readable enough for you or something like that. The default is what we call an inner join, which means you're going to include the rows where the join fields from both tables are equal. So for example, close that to look at it. I'm going to pull up the authors table, which I don't have a lot going on here in this sample database, and the books table, and you see these are all hooked to author 1. But if you wanted to show, and I think this gives you a good example here in this topic, if you wanted to show only those where both were equal, that's the inner join. If you want to show all of them, in some cases, that, let's see how we get down here. There we go. That is a left join, and in this case, we have selected from there the middle option, which is to include all rows from those on the left, and even if we can't find anything in the column or the table on the right, that's called a left join. So in the example that I had given there, we actually used a couple different ones. Again, you can just hit the delete key here and it gets stuff, things disappear. I believe I used books and checkouts. So again, it connected on book ID, and I'm just going to show both of them. And so if we're running here, for example, this shows us only the books that are checked out, because the checkouts table is showing what is actually checked out right now. However, if we look at the books table, there's 3 books. So if we change that join, we change the type of that to include all records from books and only those in checkouts where the join fields are equal, then when we run this, we should get all 3 books. And notice that the checkout fields from the checkout table are just null in those in that row because it's not checked out at this point. So there's also the just to be thorough in here, there's also this option where you include all from checkouts, where the books are equal, and so that instead of a left join, that's a right join. I myself hardly ever use that. I usually design it so it goes, you know, from the left to the right. I just find that easier to maintain. It's if you're going to join a lot of tables, it's much easier syntactically if you're looking at it in SQL if your joins are all the same direction. If you've got 3 left joins and then a right join and then a left join, the SQL for that gets very complicated with parentheses and that kind of stuff, and it's just much harder to read. So I like to keep them as left joins or inner joins as is appropriate. Also in the query setup, there is insert rows and insert columns. The rows is for use in this bottom section here, like specifically with the criteria. For example, if you had a book title and you were doing some queries, maybe you said it was like star or like Harry star. Let's just run that real quick. Okay. And say you wanted to insert something else, but you didn't want to do it in the line below. For some reason, you wanted to do it in between the two of these. Then you would click on the line below where you wanted to insert, and you would use the insert rows, and that inserts a row here. So you could put, you know, like something else or some other type of criteria in this spot. It's mainly for readability purposes. You know, if you have a question about the order things are being run in, then I would pull this into SQL view, and then you can get a better idea of the parentheses and that kind of stuff. Likewise, if you have a row in this bottom section of the query design view selected, you can use the delete rows to delete the row. Similarly, if you had columns in here and you wanted to, I probably should have had these unchecked because they're already in here. But if you wanted to insert a column between these two columns, you would select on the column to the right of where you wanted to insert and then hit insert columns, and that inserts a column in here that you could then use. And likewise for deleting, you can just use the delete columns. Depending upon what you're in, these menus are contextual. So if, for example, you were trying to put a where clause on there, okay, well, we want to say where the book title starts with a C, maybe. So this you would go under the field title and do, I believe the syntax is like, let's see if that works here. No. And so in this case, because I use SQL and Access so often, I am pretty sure that this is the SQL for it. So I'm confused and I don't know what to do as far as what the syntax I want is. So I can use the builder in that case. And again, the builder only works from a area of the query where it makes sense. Oh, yeah, you said the
call from 1800 go FedEx.
So you said but if we're going in here, and I apologize for the phone ringing in the background, I can't shut it up. Go in there and take a look, you know, what are the built-in functions, like all right, so we want like inspection there, or we might want looking for comparison. Let's look at all. So again, we don't have like there. I don't know why they don't put like there. Let's give it a try. But you could build your works here. Yeah, that works. So it is the like clause, but thank you, Phil, for pointing it out there. But say you wanted something else, like let's go for the publish date. You want to build your query with the query builder. You can use, I believe, also the right click to go in there and take a look, where you would use for instance, operators, which actually that is probably what it is, a comparison. Yeah, there we go. Here, instead of a function, it's actually an operator. I should have known that. So there's the like as a comparison operator. But, you know, this shows you the syntax, so that if you wanted to do something like, I don't know what our values are here. I think they were old dates, like 2014 dates when I published these 3 articles originally, but if we wanted to do less than and then a value, for dates usually you use number sign, so we would do something like 2014. All right, let's see if I get any results here from that. There we go. They're all less than that. Okay, so those are published dates. Let's try less than that date. Make sure our query is really working. And again, it put it down here so I can put those in. Again, you can right click, and just trying to show you a couple different ways. That shows 1, and then if you change that to less than or equal to, you could get 2 of those. What else here? That's the basics. Then we have this area over here, which shows and hides portions. The totals brings in a totals row here, which can allow you to group things and do something like sum up. So for example, if you wanted to, let's try a different example here. And notice how the total stays, because you know, it's just a click. Show it or hide it. If you click it again, it hides it. If you click it again, it shows it. So this time we're going to use checkouts history, which if we look at the checkouts history table, you see that we've got a range of dates here, and books and members who checked out various things. So say that we wanted to get the member ID book ID, the checkout date, and we wanted to sum up the number of books that each member checked out. I actually don't want this probably. Or I could do like a max here. So this actually shows how many books member 1 and member 2 checked out, and then the last time essentially that they checked out something. So that's what the totals is row is used for. And then we have parameters and just turning the property sheet on and off like that. You can also look at table names. Here it has checkout history there, and you can turn that off, not up here, but down at the bottom. You know, I think the main reason for doing something like that would be just to save space. You know, if you had a big convoluted thing up here or something, or lots of columns, and you were only dealing with one table, you know, I guess I kind of take that back. If you had lots of tables up here, it would be important to know what table name down here, you know, you were working on. But if you wanted to not show that, if it's the same table, then you have the option of turning that row off for that. Yeah, let's see what else. Before we get into parameters, I'm going to demo a couple different types of queries. Let's see how we're doing on time, 12:27. Okay, so what we've been talking about so far is a select query. And again, you can select just particular fields on one table. You can join two tables, like, see how I right-clicked up there, and you can get the same kind of things that you get on the design, or some of the same kind of things that you get on the design tab. I see in here member ID and book ID, which, you know, if you're printing a report or something like that, which you can use a query as a report. It's essentially a report in an Excel-like format, a tabular format. So you don't have to design a fancy report if all you're looking for is a query and certain fields in a query and showing them. So in this case, I probably, you know, member ID and book ID are not very meaningful, so you'd probably want to add in the member table, or the book table rather, and then the member table. And notice that there's a connection here from one to the other. A lot of people like to just click these and drag these so that it's a little bit more readable, something like this. One other thing, and I do mention that in the this first article, if you are not joining on the right side to something that is a key, so it's like in this example, I took the key off of author ID, then when you go to edit in that query or in a form that uses that query, you'll get a message saying the record set is not updatable. And this is because Access requires you to join on either a primary key or a unique index in the right side table in order to get to understand behind the scenes how to make its updates. So if you ever get that message, double check your right side and see if there's a key or an index on whatever you're joining to. Okay, so in this case, instead of member ID and book ID, you probably want to show like the full name and the book title. And you can use these columns here. You can click them and drag them around like this. Show a few more things here about before we get into more join types. And so, change the order like this. You can also use this show button and click uncheck that. So if you did that, and you viewed this, you would get, you want to have, well, this probably totals doesn't make quite as much sense in this case. Like the book title doesn't make sense because you're looking at the number of, in this particular query, having book title doesn't make sense because you're looking at the number of books. But let's assume that we're not going to do book title here. In fact, I'm going to take it out of here while we run this, sorry. But then you get, much more meaningful query. You can also, while we're at it here, change the name of what's showing. So notice when you use the totals, it's sum and group, sum and max. You get sum of book ID, max of book ID. If you wanted that instead to say number of books, that, and then a colon in there. It's nice to show the whole thing. So you could do something like that, and I'm not going to do it for the other one, just for time savings. But then instead of showing sum of books, it shows number of books, which is a little bit more friendly of a title. So you can do that. And that's really helpful if you, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you do some kind of a computation, like you can have in here in the field. You can pull in different fields. For example, say I wanted to do in the members, I wanted to do the first name, and then I wanted to do the last name, and you want to have some expression like and with a space, and then another and, something like that. You could do something like that and see how it says expression. This is generally where you don't like that word because that's going to show up if you go in here to, that is going to show expression 1, which is not very friendly. So this is where you would want to change this to, full name or something like that, which this table already had that. It's a computed field, but if you wanted to do that, you could do something like that. Okay, let's get on to some other types of queries. So that's the select query. Another kind of query you can do is to make a table. So what I like to do is kind of get the basics of what I want using the select query syntax first, and then move to one of the other types of queries. And the exception to that, which I'll show you in a minute, is, well, it's not really an exception. So yes, I like to do that for pretty much all of them. Is make table. So make table, what you basically would do is when you select that is just type in the name of the new table that you want. And so what it will do if you do that, and you can do it in the current database, or you can do it into another database. It will run that select query, and it will put the results into that other table. So when you run that, oops, calculated. All right, let's take one that's what I was complaining about. And in this case, you might want to have the property sheet, because here it's got the destination table and the database in it. So you can, that's the only place you can see that. You can't see that down here. In other types of queries like update, you can see where things are going. Expression property. Maybe this one. All right, let's make this a simple example. My apologies. Let's take out the totals. And in this case, I'm going to actually choose, and here's where you can choose the different table. Like in this case, I'm going to do the book, and I'm going to do the book title. And I kept the member ID in there. Might want the book ID in there too. In this case. Okay. Calculated columns. Oh, maybe I've got a, do I have a where clause going on? Oh, there we go. It's probably that one. You gotta check it. That was my one, probably. No, what the heck's going on here? Calculated columns. Oh, maybe because this is a calculated column. That's probably it, actually. So let's do it instead. It doesn't know maybe what the type is for that. Okay, let's try it like that. Okay, there we go. So it's going to put 5 rows, which is a select, into a new table. So here we are as our new table, and it's basically just the results of our query into that query type, which is make table. Append would be the same kind of thing, except for in that case, you append to a table, existing table. So if you had, for example, the best example I can think of using something like this is when you import, like from Excel, into some kind of holding table, and then you do a query on that holding table and append results to some kind of main table, you know, some of the columns or whatever you want to do. So that would add those rows to that existing table when you ran that type of query. You can also do an update query, and in that case, let's get a good example of what that is. So if you hit update query down below here, this is the table that you are selecting from, and then you got that? Okay, and then within your query, if you want to, so if you're going to update information, you have to have the table that you want to update values in, and whatever values you are trying to update from. So in this case, if you wanted to update, say, the last edited date in something, I'm just going to make my example simpler. I'm sorry. So when you get out of a query, if you want to save it, you hit yes. It asks you for the query name, and you can name it whatever you want. Sample And let's just do a new query in this case to make things simpler. Create. So let's look at the books, say. And let's choose everything here just so you can see what's in there. We've got books, we've got last edited date, and let's say that we are going to go ahead and change our query, and we're going to want things, we're going to want to look at things that were last edited before 2000, the year 2000. Okay, so let's do that. And so we're going to want to say the last edited date, and we don't need to show that again because it's already shown in this. And we're going to do less than $1,000. Okay, so I got two of those. Let's say that I then edited. I actually edited them because it was time to edit them. I figured out which two I wanted to edit or which ones I wanted to edit, and I actually edited. So I want to do, I mean, there's only two, right? I could just go into that table and I could change the date of last edited in those two to, today's date. But pretend you had, 100 of those and you didn't want to update 100 rows individually, then you would go in here and you'd use an update query. And then, this is still your filter. And again, as far as criteria, if you put another same column in and another criteria like this, that's talking about an and when they're both on the same row. If you want to do an or, and that is something that I discussed here in this last topic, the way to do that is to put and it doesn't make sense in this date category here because this would return everything. But if you want to actually do an or, you have to put it on the next line. And you can actually keep putting stuff on the next line and the next line if you have a multiple syntax. If it's complicated, I really highly suggest you go to can't run an update query on the asterisk. Yeah. I just want to look at the select query here. So let's go back to select a second before we run that. I'll just show you the SQL here. So you've got the parentheses and everything. If your expression is complicated, it's really probably easier for you to go to SQL mode and make sure the parentheses are in the right place and you've got what you want in there. Okay, so let's go back to the update example. If you're going to update, you want to update, get rid of this so it doesn't. Here, I only want to update those two. That's my criteria here, and I actually don't need this. I'm going to update that, but I'm going to update this to today. So I want 3/27/2018, and when I run this, let's just look at what the SQL is, just so you can see. It's going to set the book's last edited date equal to 3/27/2018. Look how it put the number signs in for me. As long as it knows the field type, it generally does that, for you, and you don't have to bother to do it. It probably would even do that if you just put the less than. I just get in the habit of putting them in for dates. So if you run this, it will then warn you that you're going to update 2 rows. And this is important to look at because if you, were wanting 100 rows and all of a sudden this says you're going to update 3,000 rows, this is where you stop and you say no, and then it doesn't do it. But if you want to do it, it says yes. And then if you go and look at the books, it's updated those last 2/3/27, 2018. Update query can be very powerful. I highly recommend, if you're not updating everything in a table, that you go in and run your select query first to make sure you have the right set, and then you do your update part. Okay, so then we have a delete query. A delete query would delete rows from a table where certain criteria held true. That would be the idea behind that. So notice how it kept that. And so if we look at the SQL end, this is going to delete, and you're really deleting everything, right? It deletes by row. So this would delete those 2 books where, well, actually it's no longer true. It's actually, let's run the select. Got nothing now on that, right? So this would return nothing, but say it did say something valid, like this, if we wanted to do that. And we ran the delete query, that would delete this row. I'm not going to do that, but that is how that works. And again, helpful if you're just deleting a couple rows, you just go to your table or whatever and select that row and you hit the delete button. But if you want to delete, say you're archiving things or something, you move things off, or you don't want to keep anything older than 7 years or whatever, that's a great way to delete large numbers of rows. Or maybe you put if you've got some kind of temporary process where you keep pulling new records into a table, you delete everything. If you leave this criteria blank, it deletes everything from that table. So you might do that with a temporary table before you pulled in a new subset of things to import or something like that. All right, let's talk about union query. We have a select query here, and I'm actually going to give a different example here. I'm going to take these 2 tables, Dallas members and Phoenix members, and you see where they've got the city and state, and again, this is just made up data. But if I want a query that shows all of those, I can do what's called a union query. And I like to start with that. And the other thing to mention is you can only do a union, on tables or queries with the same fields. So if you have different fields in one versus the other, then you can't do a union. You have to massage those into like tables, or only create a separate query to only choose the like fields that you want. And actually it doesn't have to be a separate query, it can be part of this query. So in this case, to make a union, I think the simplest case, and let me just show you what Access does for you. When you hit union, what it does is just gives you the SQL view, essentially. So, how helpful is that really? So what I like to do is instead start with a select, add a table, one of my tables. Since they're the same syntax in this case, I'm simply going to add the table, and I'm going to select star from it. If we had 2 disparate tables, and then I would want to select only and you can put them both up here. so that you can have something to look at. Notice that it doesn't join the two of these automatically. And the reason it actually does that, even though it has two fields that are the same, is because they're both primary keys. If one of these was not the primary key, then it would try to do a join from the non-primary to the primary. But here I see that they're both the same. If they weren't, then you would choose the fields that were the same. And you can actually use the colon, like you could do the if you wanted to compare them. Well, you can actually use, as long as it's the same data type, I think you can use, even if it's called something else, and you have to use them in the same order. Anyway, maybe I'll show you that as I get to the SQL here. In fact, let's go ahead and instead of a star, do all these separately, just so you can see them separated out in SQL. I'm going to delete this one, and then I'm going to view this in SQL. So in order to make a union, you would essentially copy the one, and then you have to, this semicolon means that you're at the end. So you have to get rid of the first one, and then I'm just doing this for spacing. You don't have to have spacing. And then you put the word union, and then you put the other one. And in this case, this would be, I think it's, and you can actually, it puts that in front of you. I'm probably going to simplify here. Knows that that's because you're only doing one table. Okay, so this is going to take all of the Dallas members and all the Phoenix members, and because these fields are in the same order and the same types, it's going to go ahead and display them all. So here we get all of them. If they're not the same names, but they're the same types, then you can deal with it in here by, like say this was member to ID, you could do as member ID, so that you have one consistent name so that it connects them together. So that's the union query. And then we're almost out of time here, but the last query type, I'm going to use a different database here to demo. And that's my contacts database, and that's a pass-through query. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at one of my tables in design view, even though I can't really change the design. What I'm after here is the ODBC connection for that. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to copy that, and you can do it off of a table if you don't have any queries, pass-through queries set up already. In this case, I do have pass-through queries, so if you notice pass-through queries, it's very similar. It doesn't have the table after it, but if you don't have one set up yet, so if you already have a pass-through query set up, I would just look at one of my other pass-through queries and copy that. If you don't have a pass-through query set up, copy the connection from the ODBC connection from one of your tables, your linked tables, and then you go to create query, and you don't have to do any tables here. You do have to set up what you want, to show you the pass-through area, I'm just going to click pass-through, and this moves it to SQL version. But then in the OBDC connection string, you would copy in that connection string and you would just remove the table, because you're not going to be linking to a table. In this case, you're just linking to the database, and then you would put in whatever you wanted in your SQL. It doesn't make much sense to just do a select on context unless you were doing a where. Here, so I can talk just a little bit about that. Okay, so here we've got our SQL query. Let's go back. It's a pass-through query. So what this does, the difference between a pass-through query and a query, say we had a large database and you were using a where clause, where, I forget what that was, say where company equals whatever. If you are running this in Access as an Access query and you're dealing with a connected table, whether it's connected to or linked table, either linked to Access or it's linked to SQL, whatever it's linked to, and you're running the query in a straight Access query, like a select query, it pulls back from that other database the entire context table, and then in Access, in memory, it applies your where clause. Now, if that's a table that's 1,000,000 rows in SQL, that's going to take a long time to get into Access memory. And then maybe you get, half a dozen rows that match whatever criteria you've got. If you do this as a pass-through query like this, then the communication goes to the SQL Server or wherever you are querying from, executes in that environment and does the selection, and then returns back to Access the results of that. So if, for example, you had 1,000,000 rows and the results of this in SQL were 12, all you would be copying back to Access is 12 rows instead of 1,000,000 rows. So this is huge if you're dealing with linked tables in your database and you're wanting to get some speed out of your queries. So, not all queries. If you're selecting everything and you're just selecting some fields, then it doesn't need to necessarily, it might be faster in a pass-through query, but the real speed advantage you get is where you're doing things like joins. Again, for a join, it would be the same kind of thing. If you're trying to join on two tables and it makes a smaller set when it's joined because you're doing an inner join, if you do it in an Access query, it brings both of those, the full tables, over into your Access memory, then does the join in Access. If you're doing it as a pass-through query, then it does the join on the server, like SQL Server, for example, where the tables reside, and only then returns the result set back to you. So that's the difference. We're getting really close in time here, but I'm going to, okay, I unmuted that. Allow you guys to ask questions. You can do so by either unmuting yourself or typing questions in the conversation area. Let me know what you have questions about here, or what queries you have tried that you're having trouble with. Anybody? So we got somebody typing. Well, if that's it, we will end for today. Next month, which is towards the end of April, we are doing a webinar on reports. So if you have tried to design reports and are having some trouble with it, I'll go through a few simple examples and then one that's quite complicated with like a multi-line report per item. We'll do some conditional formatting type things. So it should be informative. Thank you so much for joining us today.